If you're still relying on stacks of tech skills and boot camps to get you ahead in the data job game in 2025, you're ignoring the crux of the problem. So, listen to a podcast recently with Dr. Benjamin Hardy. If you haven't heard of this guy, you don't know his books, you should. He wrote The Gap in the Gain. He wrote 10x is easier than 2x. He wrote a book called Slipstream. Brilliant, groundbreaking books. He's an amazing author. He was on a podcast with Myron Golden, who's one of my favorites. Name's right there. And they were talking about dealing with problems, kind of, and working with businesses. But Benjamin Hardy came up with the concept of the crux. I am not a rock climber. I am deathly afraid of heights. You can barely get me on a roller coaster. But Dr. Hardy was talking about a rock climbing concept, which I can grasp. Imagine, if you will, standing at the bottom of a god-awful cliff. You're staring up at it thinking, why? That would be me. But you're staring up at it thinking, how am I going to climb this thing? You see all of these issues, challenges. There's rocky outcroppings and little rifts and places where there's no handhelds, things like that. Rock climbers refer to those as problems. And so you look at the problem and how do you solve the problem? The way they kind of break it down is they look up there and they evaluate the rock face and they identify the one problem that's more significant than any other problem, the biggest problem that you have to solve. And they call that the crux. So you imagine you look up and you see right near the summit, there's a giant rocky outcropping. You're going to have to climb backwards or whatever they do. That's the crux of the problem. And if you solve the crux, all of the other problems kind of pale by comparison. Not a rock climber, not going to go out and prove this thing. However, the metaphor is amazing. Think about that. Any problem you come to, it has, the dragon has 3 heads and you're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to... If you identify the biggest thing, the crux of the problem, and you take that down, everything else kind of pales by comparison. Now, all the other dominoes sort of fall down, maybe not by themselves, but you get the picture, right? If you solve the biggest problem, it's the biggest problem. Okay. Me being obsessed with data analysts, data jobs, the data job market, as I am, and the misconceptions about said data job market, I thought, well, what's the crux of the problem for people trying to get hired in data analytics? And I always had this feeling that everybody's getting it wrong. And I know they're getting it wrong in certain ways, but having it brought into focus like that, I was like, okay, I need to be able to express it like this. What is the crux of the problem for a data analyst looking for a job? It is to be the one. And now you're thinking, great, I've got another metaphor. But the point is, at some point, in order to get a job, you've got to finish first. Seems pretty intuitive. This is not terribly earth-shattering. You've got to actually win a job. When you break it down, though, the thing that I think everybody's getting wrong is you don't know, or you misconstrue where you've got to finish first. You're trying too hard, too early. But let's talk about the concept. You've got to be the one. Everybody's out there and they're trying to get it done with these data boot camps, with these, the pile-on tech skills and certifications and do classes, and everybody kind of follow the steps in order. Think about that for a second and think about what that produces. So here we've got the tech boot camp. What do? Well, the influencer runs the tech boot camp, and the influencer says, this set of skills work for me. Therefore, Ergo, ipso facto, it will work for everybody. It doesn't even make sense when you say it out loud, but whatever. They teach you all the skills that worked for them when they broke into tech 5, 10, 15 years ago. Makes sense. They're all still valid, right? So, but even if they've updated their tech, they're teaching each of their students the same skills. If they're a Python person, they want you to learn Python because Python's the greatest. I almost wore my R shirt for this. I feel like a bit of a hypocrite when I wear that because I don't really use R. I bought that years ago. I digress. Anyway, so the influencer says, learn this skill. Why? Because it worked for me. Therefore, it'll work for all 1,000 of you or whatever. They have you do projects. Every time they teach a chapter, do a project. Now, that's a valid thing. I'm not dumping on projects, but you're all doing the same projects, which means, and they then lead you to their favorite portfolio platform, GitHub pages or Card or, I use Canva, whatever. But then what happens? All of their students have the same projects on the same portfolio looking the exact same way. They get the same outcome. Why do they do that? Well, it's a lot less work for them. It's a whole lot more efficient. They make a lot more money with a lot less labor. It makes sense for them. It doesn't really make much sense for you because once you're done, you and all of your classmates you look like the Stepford analysts. You're exactly the same, at least on paper. Your portfolio is the same, your resume is the same, your skill set's the same. Sameness doesn't set you apart. And that's why I critique boot camps, because boot camps are building towards, or they're solving for an old game. They're building an old model. Why did boot camps come about? You got to ask yourself this. The boot camp was itself the solution to a broken model. Once upon a time, not all that long ago, we had all of these college graduates, right? Everybody wanted to go to college to be a software engineer, computer programmer, whatever the name was at the time. And so we had all these people coming out into tech, but then suddenly there wasn't as much call for those types of jobs. Well, now what becomes important? Now we have these increasing mountains upon mountains upon mountains of data, and software programming wasn't doing anything with the data. So now we need people that, maybe they don't need a 4-year degree in computer science or software programming, but we do need them to be able to handle data. But a data analyst doesn't necessarily need a 4-year degree. They might only need 6 or 9 or 12 months worth of training, maybe even less than that, to learn the basic skills required of a data analyst. So the boot camps sprung up. Why spend $100,000, $200,000, whatever the exorbitant fee is now, for a bachelor's degree when really all you need is a year's worth of schooling? Here's my boot camp. I only charge $5,000, $10,000, depending on the pedigree and the outcomes. But it's shorter, it's cheaper. You can probably use the same financial aid programs. Lots of good things. So the boot camp itself was in response to an outdated brick and mortar school model. The problem we run into now is the boot camp itself is now the broken model. It now generates sameness. What's wrong with sameness? Doesn't everybody need all the same skills? No. And so what you have today is you've got this army of boot camp trained or course trained, Google Analytics trained analysts, all with the same credentials, same skills, out there complaining that the job market is broken. It's not broken. The job market's just looking for something different than what you're bringing to the table. And what are you bringing to the table? Same as everybody else. What you've got to do is solve the crux of the problem, right? Be the one. How do you be the one? Well, you've got to be interesting. You've got to be different. You've got to stand out. You can't be the exact same as everyone else that came out of your boot camp. Here's where people get it doubly wrong. I think everybody kind of knows, yeah, you've got to win at some point in the process. But let's talk about what is the process we're talking about. Let's start at the end. Always a useful exercise. How many jobs do you need? You just need one job. That's why people bitching about the job market kind of hits me sideways, because you don't need a job market. You just need one job. And there's always one job out there that you could do. So, end result. What you need is to get hired for one job. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but how many interviews do you need to go on to get one job? Well, you've got to be one of the people in the room for the interview in order to get the one job. Let's just say, we'll keep it with nice round numbers so the math is easier. Let's just say every interview you go on has 10 candidates, 10 people in the room. All other things being equal, if you're one of 10 people in the room, what are the odds of you getting the job? P equals 0.1. I'll do a little bit of low-level math later. But 10 interviewees for one job. Backing it up one more step, what happens before the interview? Well, you probably get a call screen. People do get screened out, as the name implies, during a phone screening process, or you may do a video screen, don't know. But let's just say, again, nice round numbers, 20 people get phone screened for that one job to yield 10 people to come in for an interview and one hire. Numbers are starting to get a little bit bigger. Before the phone screen, we back it up one more step, and you've got maybe 100 resumes that get a thorough reading. And that is based off of, let's say, 1,000 candidates that submit their resume. Now, some of these funnel transitions, you can definitely quibble with the math. And I can hear recruiters and hiring managers screaming everywhere. I tried to keep the numbers nice and big and round and easy to grasp. But everybody sits there and they look on LinkedIn or they look on Indeed or your platform of choice. You find that job that you're really interested in, and you see, oh my gosh, it was posted yesterday and it has 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 applicants. Whole bunch of other content. You can listen to my podcast, Interview with Stephanie Holman, and we'll talk about the yeah buts that go along with that. The point that I'll make here is fret not. If you see a job for which you are qualified, apply for the darn thing. Don't be dissuaded by the big goofy numbers that you see, because they're tend to not be terribly accurate. Won't get into that, but 1,000 applicants for that job you want. You're one of the ones that is fully qualified, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. So you are one of 100 that gets a thorough reading for the job. Okay. Now, here's where people get it wrong. They miss the crux of the problem. Now, the crux of the problem is to be the one, but you got to be the one where? The mistake that I see people making is they think it's here. Think about that. That's really intimidating. That's why people freak out when they look at that job and they see there's 5,000 people that applied. How can I be number one out of 5,000? Maybe you can't. I'd be intimidated if there were 5,000 qualified applicants and they said, can you be the one? Yeah, probably not. It's like trying out for American Idol. But the point is, you don't actually have to be number one out of 5,000 or 1,000 or even 100. You don't have to be the one here. Why? Because the cut line is from 1,000 to 100. Even if these numbers are accurate, they're not. But even if they were, to get a thorough reading, you don't have to be number one out of 1,000. You just got to be in the top 10%. Still a little daunting if all 1,000 of these were qualified. They're not. Trust me on this. But if you had 1,000 qualified applicants, even being in the top 10%, that's a little daunting, but it's doable. You don't have to be the best here. What do you have to be to move down that top of funnel? Acceptable, qualified. In order to graduate from this pool of initial applicants into the yes pile or the maybe pile on the hiring manager's desk, getting a thorough reading to see if you're a candidate for a phone screen, you just have to be qualified for the job. I talk about this a lot more in Data Career Academy, but the point is people miss the crux of the problem. They think I gotta be the man, the absolute unicorn, best of the best right here, number 1 out of 1,000. So what do? They don't focus on the crux of the problem. They focus on ancillary issues. That's why people freak out about the applicant tracking system. That's why people spend all this time and money and effort right here in this first stage of the process, getting through the top of the funnel. And then what happens is they grind their resume to dust. They try and cram as much crap in there as possible. 10 extra skills that they don't need for this job. And their resume becomes, if I can borrow a data science term, it's overfit. We all know what overfit means when it comes to a machine learning model. It's entirely possible to overfit your resume. Back in the Marine Corps in the rifle range, we would call it chasing the target. You're trying to make such fine adjustments that you wind up losing the fundamentals. The fundamentals at this first point in the hiring process is be acceptable, adequate, qualified. That's what moves you down the funnel. So here we are, 1 out of 1,000, but we're acceptable and qualified. What does that mean? It means we've got either all of the required skills and qualifications from the job description or a majority of them. Okay. Now, influencers will tell you apply for a job if you're 60, 70% qualified. To me, that's like buying a lottery ticket. And lottery is a tax on people that failed math. And I didn't fail math. I got C's, but we'll leave that. Personally, I recommend to my clients, you apply for jobs for which you are fully qualified or very close. Maybe you're missing a year of experience. Be that as it may. In order to feel good about getting a thorough reading of your resume and moving into a phone screen, apply for jobs for which you are fully qualified. If you see that dream job out there and you got about 70%, maybe take a shot. Remember, it's a lottery ticket. Every once in a while, you buy a ticket, you win the lottery. Okay, so we're going from the reading to the screening. Once again, 1,000 to 100, that's 10 to 1, you're gonna be top 10%. Now we're going 100 to 20, 5 to 1, you're gonna be top 20% of the read resumes. Again, do you need to be the one at this stage in the game? No. Once again, you need to be qualified. Think about what people are seeing here. These first 2 steps, this isn't really a step. It happens behind the scenes. You're not going to see it, but trust me, it's happening. But this evolution right here, what do these people know about you? Piece of paper. They've got your resume. They don't have you. They're not talking to you, the human. They don't hear my corny dad jokes and see my wild gesticulations marker tapping on the marker board. No. They see my name on a piece of paper in black and white. I use some blue font as well. So remember that. They're not actually evaluating you. They're not meeting you at this point. All they see is what you've represented of yourself and your career on a piece of paper. That's why it's got to be adequate. They don't know who's the best. They don't know who's lying on their resume. They don't know who's embellished it. Where do they find that out? When they talk to you. So remember, they're evaluating a piece of paper. They want to know if you have the skills and experience that they have said are required to do this job. If yes, there's a very good chance you're going to get a phone call. Okay? So be adequate on paper. Here on the phone screen, now the game has changed. Now the game is no longer to be adequate, but do you now need to be the best of the best? You're going from 20 down to 10. That's a 50% cut. You only got to be in the top half of these knuckleheads in order to move along. What do you need to do to establish in this phone screen in order to get into the interview room? Once again, you still don't have to be the one. You don't have to win this fight. This is like, if you look at the Olympics, the early heats of the track and field events. When you watch Sha'Carri Richardson or one of these world-class champion-level sprinters, half the time they don't even win their early heats. They don't care. All they got to do is beat enough people to get into that final. And then it's 100 meters. Fastest one wins. They conserve their strength. Now, I'm not saying conserve your strength, but you don't have to win this. Look at that, 20 to 10. It's probably not even that, honestly. It's probably not a 50% cut. It's like a 20% cut. But what do you have to establish in a phone screen? Keep in mind, they can't see your face most of the time. You may do a video screen, but generally, this is going to be just a phone call, if it even happens. But the phone screen, what do they get? Your voice. What are they checking to find out? Are you a complete nut job? Or can you not speak? Can you not communicate? And also, do they think you're lying about your resume? If there's any questionable things on the resume, you're likely to get asked about them in a phone screen. If they say, Mr. Bellamy, I see here you've got a 9-month date gap before your last job. It's not explained on the resume. What happened there? Oh, my dad got sick. I had to become a home caretaker for a little bit. It was a whole big thing. Got right back into the job market as soon as he was better. Understandable. If, on the other hand, they say, Mr. Bellamy, you have a 1-year date gap, and I go, yeah, about that, I might not be moving on down the phone. Okay? So if they ask you about something that's a little bit questionable, they ask you about something that might be a bit of a deal breaker, and you can answer it fluidly because you're smart and you've anticipated the question coming, because you're not going to try and hide from it, you're going to move forward. If they speak to you and you sound like a functional human being, like you can carry on a conversation and you probably will be a functional employee for the company, you're probably going to move forward. Again, you don't have to be the one here. You ain't got to win this and be number 1 out of 20. But you do have to establish that you are competent, normal, functional, communicative, interested, all those things. Okay? Once again, it's a little more than adequate at this point, and you do have to actually have some kind of interpersonal communication ability. So the game changes. But the percentages, you still don't have to be number 1 until interview time. Now you got 10 people in the room. There's only one job. I'm getting mental flashbacks of the Joker and the Dark Knight. Anyway, hopefully it's not quite that violent. 10 people, one job. Now what do you have to do? Here we've got the crux of the problem. Now you got to win. But there's always a yeah, but, isn't there? People still get this wrong. What do you have to win at? Sometimes it depends on the kind of interview. However, you need to be 1 of 10 according to, right there, fit. You don't necessarily need to be the most brilliant technical person of the 10 people that come into that interview room. You also don't necessarily need to be the one that bros down or sisses down. Is that a thing? That bros down with the interviewers the best. The whole, I want to have a beer with this person, a little bit overblown. Most hiring processes are a little more professional than that. However, you do need to come off as personable and communicative, just like the phone screen. You do have to come out of the room as the number one person that they want to work with, that they think can do the job. You've got to be a behavioral fit, a cultural fit, and a social fit. It's not always popular to say, but it's true. At this point, you may be saying, but Albert, what about the tech interview? Look at that. I wrote that going up. I ran out of space down here. I think I wrote it going up top. But Albert, what about the tech interview? Yes, we've got this behavioral interview. Awesome. I'm the best fit. They want to bro down with me and have beers. Now I've got a tech interview. Don't I have to win that too? Let me explain. Let's say you're going super basic. You are going in for a SQL interview. And, see, I love my whiteboards, people. You're going into whiteboard SQL. They give Albert the SQL challenge, and they give Lulabelle, hypothetical person. Lulabelle is the other person competing with me. We're both awesome fits. Right? Actually, let's say for the play of the problem, I'm an awesome fit. Lulabelle, kind of a weirdo. Didn't ask any questions of the interviewers. I'll do that. Anyway, so I'm a good fit. They're not so sure about it. But they're like, let's see who's technically qualified. We get the same SQL whiteboard problem. We both do it adequately. We both get the right answer to the problem. We both reason out our query in a way that displays that we understand SQL and how to get the answer. Okay, whatever the technical examination is for you. We both write it out, we talk it out, we explain it. It's clear we both know what the heck we're doing. Lulabelle finishes her SQL query and explanation 10 seconds faster than I do. But we're both obviously quite comfortable with it. Does she now win the interview? No. Does she win the technical interview? No. Also no. You don't have to be the best of the best with the technical interview. When we get back to the technical interview, we're right back here. Be acceptable. Be qualified. Why? Because it's not the Olympic 100-meter dash. You don't need to beat the other person by 3 seconds. Qualified is qualified when it comes to technical stuff. Now, if you're trying out for Google, all bets are off. If you want a job at Microsoft or Netflix, I don't know what that's all about. I've never interviewed there. But keep that in mind. 2 people are roughly equally qualified technically. One's maybe a hair better than the other, but the one that's a little slower at coding or whatever, both qualified. One that's a little slower blows the other out of the water as a fit. The fit is going to win every stinking time. Okay. So that's what I mean when I say the crux of the problem. Yeah, you got to win. I know lots of people that spend all their time down here and never get an interview. Never, ever, ever. I have had clients that have been applying for years. Blows my mind. Years. Never get an interview. I would quit. My hat's off to them. Their discipline and dedication is far greater than mine. I would change jobs. But props to them. I also know lots of people that get through. Why? Because they're good at this part. Resume's good, probably because I wrote it for them. They get through a call screen because they're functional humans and they can speak. They get to that interview. They freak. They don't ask good questions. They spaz. They get performance anxiety, whatever it is. You can finish second in the interview over and over, and there ain't no silver medals. Now, there's other things you can do, and you can make a good impression, and maybe the company calls you back 6 months later when they have another job. That's the whole thing. However, let's just say for the purposes of our problem here today, if you finish second in the interview, you get nothing. Okay. Now, I mathed out a little bit up here, was talking about, don't really need to belabor this. A lot of times, did I just lisp? Holy crap, where'd that come from? Some kind of Toastmaster I am. A lot of times I will kind of quiz people that I'm coaching and I'll say, hey, 10 people in the interview room every time, what are the odds of you getting a job? They say 1 out of 10, or 0.1. They're stat savvy. But okay, 0.1 probability of getting the job. Cool. How many interviews do you need to go on to be likely to get a job if you have a 0.1 probability every single time? The two most popular answers I get are 10, that's wrong, and 5, that's also wrong. If you understand stats, and I started dorking out up here, probability of getting one job is 0.1. For some reason in stats, you always have to go with the inverse, converse, obverse, who knows? Anyway, the opposite. So the probability of not getting the job is 0.9. So you go on 2 interviews, the probability of not getting either job is 0.81, which is 0.9 squared. And then I did some algebra up here. Essentially what it comes down to, and you can check my math, is you have to go with equal probability, 10 candidates per round. You have to go to 7 interviews to make it likely that you will get one job. Okay. Now, you probably, if you go on 7 interviews, you should be getting better every time. So by the end, you should be like the ace in the interview room, but let's just make it statistically pure. Okay. So you can back plan from there. I need one job. How many interviews do I need to go on to get one job? 7, all other things being equal, assuming 10 candidates per. How many phone screens do I need to get? How many solid reads do I need to get? Therefore, how many applications do I need to put in? That is, once again, ignoring the crux of the problem. Why? Because if this whole thing is a fair process, it's not. But if this whole thing is a fair process and all 1,000 of these candidates are equally qualified, they're not. Then, yes, from here you have a 1 in 1,000 chance of getting the job. That's daunting. Anybody want to submit 1,000 resumes or even 700? We're doing the math? Heck no, not me. So, that brings us back to the crux of the problem. How do we increase our chances of being the one? Because every step is an opportunity to trip up. If you have a 0.1 chance, all other things being equal, of getting from a 1,000 group to a 100 group, I don't like my chances. That means I've got to do volume applications, and I'm lazy, and I don't want to do that. And I don't want you to have to do that. This here is what I call the front door. I don't like the front door. Coming in the front door means you're a salesman or you're doing the Girl Scout cookies or some weird stuff like that. I want to come in through the side door. At my house, I come in through the garage. That's where you come in if you're a friend of the family. So the front door, 1,000 or 10 to 1 to move along here, 5 to 1 to move along here. You got a 1 in 1,000 chance. I hate those odds. I don't buy lottery tickets. Not me. So in order to increase your chances and solve the crux of the problem and be the one, what do you want to do? Well, you want to go in the side door. What's the side door? You know somebody. They're going to hook you up. It's not nepotism, just call it a referral. And we've got all sorts of content about why referrals are good and why there's nothing wrong with it. It's not. People will talk about that like it's low-key bribery. Absolutely not. But referrals. You want referrals. Trust me on this. Now, I've got other content on how to get referrals. We won't talk about that here today. But look at what a referral does. Instead of 10 to 1, you got a 1 in 10 chance, a 0.1 probability of getting a solid reading. If you get a referral, at the very least, your resume is going to get a thorough reading. Chances are your side door is going to come in here and you're going to, at a minimum, get a phone screening. May even wind up here. Look at what you've done there. By cultivating a relationship and getting a referral or leveraging someone from your network, if you come in here instead of here, what have you done? You've just 10x'd your probability of getting that job. If you come in here at the phone screen, you've just 50x'd your opportunity to get that job. If you get an interview, 100x or maybe even more. Because if you come into that interview with a stamp of approval from a trusted employee within the company, they know that. You have some social proof going in that everybody else has got to earn it. You walk in and they say, hey, Fred knows this guy. He's legit. Right. Moral of all of that and all of my chicken scratch all over the board is don't play an outdated game. Going to college, getting a 4-year or 2 degrees or whatever to become a data analyst, that is a woefully outdated game. That's like a 2010 game. You're going back decades. Going to a boot camp thinking that's going to make it for you, you're playing a slightly newer game, but it's still outdated. You are playing to a broken model. That's the 2020 model. Boot camps all blew up during COVID. Everybody was getting remote work. Don't play to a broken model. Don't play an outdated game. The name of the game in the data job market now is differentiation. What makes you special? How do you become the one? Solve the crux of the problem. Become the one guy or gal that they can't live without. And you're going to be the winner at the end of the day. If you got questions for me, comments, concerns, suggestions for further content, please leave me a comment, like, and subscribe. With that, my friends, Semper Fidelis, and I'll talk to you later.